The reality quite often in what we do is that we have mentors in the gaffers that we hire, the grips that we hire, who work with all these different DPs. And they give me information every time and teach me every time. And it is the grips, the gaffers, and the operators who are all jumping from DP to DP who share tons and tons of information, who are the people who I get inspiration from.
Welcome back to Craft Truck, Through the Lens. We're in a hotel room in New York City where we have been generously given the time of William Rexer.
The second. Yep.
Junior?
No, second.
You just don't go by...
Well, my father was Robert, my grandfather was William, and he was alive when I was born, so that's where I got the second.
You are a photographer, a cinematographer who has worked on documentaries, narrative films,
music
videos, commercials.
Yep.
You've shot 35. You've shot video. You've shot every format there is. And more importantly, you've shot in the narrative field. You've shot comedies.
Yep.
And you've shot with Ed Burns, one of the rare voices, unique voices in cinema.
An amazing guy.
Today.
Yep.
Great to know he's an amazing guy because it's
a great dad, great husband, good friend.
So just describe the process of work. I mean, because he tends to do very talky, not improv. They don't seem totally improv.
They're not improv, but they feel natural at improv because he can write language really well. He can write dialogue beautifully. So, but he also, he recognizes that these type of cameras, the Canon 5D is what we shot Newlyweds on.
Right.
We had no idea whether it was going to work. We just thought, all right, it was my scouting camera. We had a $10 million film that was supposed to happen that got canceled. We had a cast. He said, let me see, I have an old script. And he worked on it for 2 weeks, and we put the people together, and we started shooting with the 5D, and we kind of felt it out. We said, this is really liberating. So we went with it.
You were supposed to be making a $10 million picture with Ed.
Yep.
And you were scouting, and it got canned.
Yep.
And you just replaced that movie with Newlyweds.
Exactly.
This is like a story from the 50s Hollywood that you never hear anymore.
Well, I mean, the nice thing is Eddie writes, he's like a musician. He writes every day. And then might go somewhere, and he might go, I'm going to put this in the cabinet. I'll save this for another time. And then... So when something like this comes up, he goes, I have the perfect script for that. And he'll go dig it out, rework it, and
there you go.
And there we go.
When you made Newlyweds on the 5D, I mean, you're shooting what, like 20 days?
No, we shot Newlyweds probably in a total of 12 days. Probably 8 days of principal photography, and then running around, between me shooting commercials and me doing. It happened Newlyweds happened right after Friends with Kids. So Eddie was in Friends with Kids, and we were shooting that film, and he just said, let's go, jump into it. So we did.
Is there any particular sequences in Newlyweds that you're most fond of?
There's a really simple one with Carrie Bichet when she's on the bed, and it was just, we took it's a 20 mil. She's lying there, and it just happens to be she's in the bed, and she's just talking on the phone. It's just such a simple, it reminds me of French New Wave completely.
You still there? Listen, don't be a jackass. Just meet me for a drink, okay? Yeah, okay. Hey. Thanks.
And that was the nice thing. I mean, that film, we went into restaurants and bars.
Yep.
And I would say, okay, let's go near the window. There's Christmas lights out there. That'll illuminate them. We didn't buy the L series lenses. We went and bought the 1.4, the cheap lenses.
The T14, the T18.
Yeah. And that's what we shot the whole thing with. No, special gears, no map boxes. So we could sit at a restaurant that was open and shoot a whole scene, and nobody would know that we were shooting.
What is Mr. Burns' sense of blocking, of rehearsal? Is it just, let's just go shoot? Because, I mean, it's different. I mean, obviously, there's an advantage to shooting on 35.
Sure.
In that you have to give thought to what you're doing.
Yep.
You have to give extreme thought. And plenty of directors, cinematographers, editors have said that the worst thing that could happen is when, we have endless...
Sure.
They just keep shooting. They shoot the rehearsal, they shoot after the rehearsal, they shoot everything.
No, we first of all, when you're trying to do a project in essentially 10 days...
Yeah.
You can't do that anyway. I mean, we might watch a blocking unfold and say, okay, here's how this is going to work. But we never went into it sort of willy-nilly. We knew, okay, all right, here's how the scene unfolds. The camera should be over here. We've got the depth of the door. This betrays the master. This is the line.
So you tend to work fast?
Yeah, we work very fast, particularly when you've got a small camera and limited amount of lights.
Now, as far as lights is concerned, do you try and run with a smaller crew, small amount of lights? I mean,
well, again, everything varies. I mean, Eddie's that type of film. We tried to go. We did a lot of this type of thing where you're taking, you're taking a light and you're wrapping it in a pillowcase.
You're revealing our secret here, by the way.
You'd have a single light source like this, and I might wrap the back in black so that it's not all over the walls and that type. But it was very, very simple. And some of the simple tricks are still what you use even in a bigger movie or even in a TV show. There's nothing as nice as a Chinese lantern for a face. There's nothing as nice as a piece of fabric as opposed to a piece of plastic to push light through. So on a bigger job, I might be pushing, we might pull that wall and put a 5K through 2 layers of diffusion. But here, you've got to
do work with what you have.
You got to work with what you have.
So you still shoot a lot of commercials.
Yep.
Typically, the story is that the client and the agency and the producer thinks you're nuts if you're not getting a piss ton of light.
Right.
Right. So, I mean, you know how to play that game?
It completely varies. I mean, it varies on how knowledgeable the client is and what you're doing. I do, in the last couple of years, I've done a lot of work with the Phantom high-speed camera, where you teach a lot of people what actually a lot of light is. We were doing a scope commercial, for instance, where we had a scope bottle hits onion and destroys it.
Right. Because that's what scope bottles tend to do, is destroy onion
So
and
we were
garlic.
shooting a bullet, hitting a hollow tip bullet and blowing the stuff up, and then we'd shoot a bottle and comp the two together. Well, in that, we're shooting so fast. We had a row of 24 Ks, so they're like 20 Ks, but they're 4,000
watts more.
And you have a row of those, and then you have a row of mirrors just underneath it, bouncing that back. You're
to
trying
get
to create
even more
shape.
on it. Yeah.
But everything's on dimmers. You bring it up, you shoot the bullet, you bring it all down as fast as possible. Otherwise, you're cooking the onion. You're cooking everything. And things catch on fire.
Well, wait, so let's just explain this for people. When you're shooting at 300, 400, 600 frames a second.
2,700 frames per second for the Google Chrome commercial, for instance.
Oh, that was 2,700.
2,700
so
frames per
2,700. Now you're shooting at over 100 times regular frame rate, meaning that the
so 2,700 frames, 1,000 frames you'd need 41 times the amount of light.
41 times.
So if you're talking about 110K, all of a sudden you're now telling a producer you need 41 10K.
So this is 100 times the amount of light.
Right. So it's massive amount of light. The Google Chrome stuff was so much fun because a shoe would drop, it would hit a keystroke, and you would create lightning with a Tesla coil. It would go across the screen, and what would happen first, going from Google Chrome to weather.com or the lightning, which was faster.
You happen to have fallen into being kind of like a high-speed guy now as part of what you do.
Yes, one of my
arsenal.
lives. Yeah. And that came from being friends at a rental house with guys who were developing the Phantom camera, and when they wanted to test it, taking it out and testing it. So, sort of sometimes things are luck that way.
Got it. Interesting. Back on your first of all, have you shot television?
I have shot television.
Oh, this is the
my
job.
show was just canceled.
How did you find out the show was canceled today?
The executive producer called and said the show's canceled. But that happens in this business. It's at the whim of a network executive who, obviously they were thinking that this show was going to replace another show. The other show got legs and they didn't need it anymore. So that's part of it. I mean, I think that's the bottom line was.
You're in a business, and this product is
right. They can't have two shows that are about radio stations, and this was about a radio station, and the Matthew Perry radio station show has legs, and they're gonna continue shooting it. So they're like, we don't need the other show. So you get killed, and millions of dollars get flushed down the toilet, and no one will ever see the material. And even though we're very proud of what we did, and it was a good show, it doesn't matter.
Dane Cook is in it.
Yeah, Jeffrey Tambor.
Great cast.
Great cast.
Where were you in the shooting schedule?
We had already shot 3 episodes and had reshot sections of the pilot.
So you shot for presumably
We shot 3 weeks.
3.5 weeks.
Yeah,
or
3.5
something.
weeks, exactly.
18 days of shooting. You have a crew working. Everybody's working. Is it all studio or is some of it location?
Both, combination of both. I have a great crew. I've pulled people off other shows. I've got all these people who have families and bills to pay.
How long do you have to dismantle it?
They'll have a week, pull it all down.
And then strike and
Yeah, no, and we all put a lot of effort into it. I have a great gaffer, Scott Ramsey, who the night before we're sitting there talking about how to make this one area of the stage better looking, and we're examining footage and talking about it, and the next minute
This is ridiculous. Why did you hire a co-host?
Because your show sucks and your ratings are garbage.
What if I refuse?
Well, let's see. You can play Christian metal on Gibraltar, Canadian jam music on the ice floe, smooth jazz on pastels. Or I fire you.
I feel really bad for my crew. No matter what, they'll lose days of work, and that's a big deal. So,
Yep.
for people who are living check to check.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Your attitude about it is probably the most important thing, because you feel bad for the parts that you feel bad for, and the parts you can't control, or the parts you can't control.
yeah.
The biggest well, I don't know the biggest. The most expensive feature that you've shot has been
Probably Accidental Husband.
Accidental Husband.
Yeah, a film that didn't really get out there that much because the distribution company went bankrupt when it was finished. It was Bob Yari's company.
Yep. Yari Entertainment.
Yeah, and the distribution side of that went bankrupt while we were making the movie. So that was an issue with that. But it was it has Jeffrey Dean Morgan, Colin Firth,
Yep.
Isabella Rossellini, Uma Thurman, Sam Shepard. It was a blast to work on.
What was it like working with Sam Shepard?
He was terrific. I mean,
I
he's
know I
amazing.
jumped to him, but the only reason I jumped, he's talking about it's most people go, oh, I recognize that guy. It's Sam Shepard, is
Right.
that actor from Thunderheart, and I go, yeah, that's Sam Shepard, probably the greatest living playwright of
yeah.
the 20th
And he plays
century.
Uma's dad in
Yeah,
it, and
yeah.
they're just terrific together. I mean, they were a great pair, and I wish more people would see it. It's one of these films that I think the banks control it, so it never got its fair day in the box office.
What was your approach to visually designing that movie?
Well, Griffin Dunn directed it.
Yeah,
and
he's an interesting cat.
He's great. We looked at the films of the 20s, we looked at the films of the 50s, and they really wanted this to be an old-style romantic comedy.
I hear that, and I think high key lighting and strong highlight.
Yep, there was quite a bit of that,
Yeah.
with a little bit of a modern edge to it, longer lenses,
Yeah.
a bit more dolly movement. There was a scene where Colin and she are remodeling an apartment, and we had to have it completely, torn apart and in remodeling mode, and we had to have it then fixed. So the easiest way to do it was to just take that sheathing that you use, the plastic that you use for painting, drop cloths, and it was all splattered and covered, and hung it over all the windows and all the stuff. So it looked completely disastrous in terms of lace, but it had such a beautiful quality of the light, because the hard light that we were pushing through for the next scene just was gorgeous. And it was just one of these accidental things. As soon as we started to put it up, we thought we were going to have to strike half of it, but it just Uma looked
So good.
beautiful, and Colin looked fantastic in it. And it just was one of these magical moments. So that's probably one of my favorite, just
Things
purely
you
for a
never
light.
One of the questions I like to ask is, sometimes as a cinematographer, you go to the theater to see your work,
Yep.
or if you're lucky enough to see a rough cut,
Right.
which doesn't often happen, but
Right.
you go to the theater to see your work. There it is, it gets thrown up, and sometimes it's like, how could they have edited this way? It's just like, I shot it. It was in the room. It was better than this. And then sometimes it's just like, oh, did this come out like just smoke
Right,
and
sure.
gang butt? So, was there a sequence in Accidental Husband where you saw the way it was cut and you just went, that's just such great cutting,
I have to say that, with Griffin and with Eddie, and even with Chris Rock, I spent a decent amount of time in the edit room. So,
Oh, really?
yeah, so I didn't have those virgin eyes of, each one of them I went into the edit room a decent amount.
So tell us about that. Because what that means is that tells me that your relationship with them is much closer than just.
They're all friends of mine. I mean,
Right.
they've become, through the films, they've become friends, but during the edit process, almost each step, they'd call me up and say, come take a look, take a look, and give me feedback, and we would. Max Winkler's film, Ceremony,
Yeah.
with Uma as well. Her on the beach with Michael Angarano, the two of them walking and talking along the beach is one of my favorite moments. Everything about it was natural. I mean, the two of them, the tide was low but on its way up. They're trying to avoid the waves that are coming up. I got to go I put on a 1971 vintage zoom lens to soften everything up. A lot of the time you want to shoot at 6:45 in the morning. By the time the actor gets through in hair and makeup, it's 9:45.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And now you're stuck shooting it.
Yeah.
This was 6:45, and we were rolling at 6:45. And Uma was willing. She was supposed to be like she just rolled out of bed, and she was willing to play it that way. She looked beautiful because she was unmade up.
Natural.
And we were far enough away almost all the time that they could act naturally and be themselves. And so we got 3 or 4 takes of it. It's just one of those beautiful moments.
Yeah.
So
Sounds like kind of like a pure cinema kind of an experience. Like you mentioned Godard earlier, but that really sounds. You had the camera, you had the actors, and that was it.
We had a bit of that in Nice Guy Johnny, where we're at the beach, and our leading lady is in the water swimming, and the sun was about to set. We were about 15 minutes before the sunset. And Eddie and I looked at each other, it's just not, how are we going to get this entire scene? The two of them are supposed to be talking, then she's supposed to go swimming. And it was a bay where it went out forever and never got deep. Eddie's assistant and friend, Nick Newbold, grabbed the tripod. We both run out there. We shoot it. She comes swimming. She comes back. We shot the entire scene in that 15-minute window. We kept sliding down the beach because the sand dune got lower and lower, and the sun kept peeking over the top of it. So the sun is sitting there at the edge of the peak for that entire time. And people said, how many days did that take to shoot? Because it
Wouldn't happen.
It wouldn't happen under any other circumstance, except if you had having actors who were willing to jump around and do it, a director and a whole crew when the whole crew was Nick, myself, and Eddie, so it was much smaller. So
But you cheated it and it worked.
It cheated and it worked, and sometimes those magic moments are fantastic.
Shooting for Chris Rock.
Uh-huh.
So, how does he come to you? And how do you get the script, and how did that come about?
Honestly, I thought I was meeting with Charles Stone because Charles was originally meant to direct that movie.
Okay.
And I was in Los Angeles shooting a commercial, and I came back to New York, and I went into an office, and Adam Brightman, who was the executive producer, and Chris were at the desk, and there was no Charles Stone, and I sat down, and I thought, oh, maybe this is the initial interview process that I have to talk to Chris first.
Chris wants. Yeah. The actor wants to know who's lighting him or whatever.
So we sat down and we talked about movies. We talked about what we loved, what we didn't love about movies. We talked about art. We talked about photography.
Some of the things that came up were
Romer, the films of Eric Romer.
Yeah, Chris Rock's a big Eric Romer fan.
Huge fan.
Phenomenal, really.
Yeah. We talked about our fathers. We talked about our relationships with our families. We talked about children because for Chris it was very important that somebody had real values who was making this movie with him. That one, because the story, he wanted somebody to really understand what the stakes were, what this character was about to give up. A day later, I asked him, I said, what happened to Charles? And he said, I'm directing. And I said, oh. He said, well, Charles, after a few weeks of talking, is not a Woody Allen fan, or is not as much of a Woody Allen fan as I am. And we didn't see eye to eye on those type of things. He said to me that, that's quintessential. Like, and for comedy, and that's the type of comedy I want to tell. And Chris was amazing. I mean, we walked through every single scene with a still camera, blocked every single scene, knew exactly what every shot was going to be before we got there. And he knew what those were in reference to in terms of film history. He's one of the most knowledgeable film guys that you'll ever meet.
I don't need some girl with her big-ass village beaters asking me if I need some help. Is this Hooters?
No, sir.
Is it Hooters?
No, sir.
I know it's a Hooters, because if it is, you owe me some fucking buffalo wings.
What was your visual approach to them? I mean, obviously you explained something just now by saying you blocked every scene. It was obviously very structured and everything. But as far as the quality of light and the quality of I mean, did you live on one lens? Did you want to go a little bit medium wide, or it looked to me like a fairly medium lens movie?
I mean, a lot of the close-ups were done with 65 mil. So yes, and we weren't doing 135 millimeter close-ups in there. I mean, even when we were in there, they were 65 millimeter close-ups.
Right.
Because we wanted the camera to be an active participant as opposed to a voyeur.
Right.
And they were the Cooke S4 lenses because I found. I mean, I'm usually a Zeiss person, and I love the Zeiss lenses. But when I get into a situation where I have a lot of women, instead of doing a lot of filtering, I tend to like
Those
to
Cookes, I tell you.
those Cookes. The Cookes are sort of an equalizer across men and women. It doesn't look like you're switching back and forth and putting a filter on for the women and not for the men. And that's what we tended to go with the Cooke S4s for that.
As far as the actual performances are concerned, with the reveal.
Kerry Washington?
Yeah, well, when she first comes onto the screen,
Right.
just, it's like, wow.
That moment, we definitely highlight that moment a little.
A little bit.
Yeah.
But I'm saying that very
Sure.
complimentary. It's
Yeah.
really,
Yeah.
but if you're watching, your eye is drawn to her, obviously.
Right. And that was in
But
a
it's-
real location. That wasn't on a stage.
Right.
So we didn't have as many of the freedoms of, when you're on a stage, you can hang from the grid all sorts of lights and backlight people more easily. When you're in a real practical location, that was an office space that was, a real office space. So it became, it's a bit more challenging. Where he makes the decision to leave her is a really interesting one because that was a real practical location too, where he's about to cross the threshold and he decides, no, I gotta leave, and splits out of there. That was a very, probably the funnest one was the silliest one, which is when they're in Washington, which is Brooklyn,
Yep.
and the gunfire goes and he meets up with her ex-boyfriend, and that sort of rumble and fight happened. It was we all had so much fun making that movie, I have to look at that again.
William Rexer, thank you for
You're
joining
welcome.
us this fast. So we're going to have to come back and do this again.
All right.
And talk about more of your new work.
All right.
And just have more chatting because this is fascinating.
I have to say that I have the best job in the whole world, and so I'm very lucky.